Welcome to Sinkowitz, hosted by the fearless Linda Sinkowitz. She's syncing you up with the latest in election integrity, from breaking headlines to critical updates you won't hear anywhere else. With Linda, it's facts first as she leads the fight for one vote for one legal voter. Stay informed, stay empowered. Let's jump in.
Hi, and welcome to Sinkowitz. I'm Linda Sinkowitz. I'm the founder and CEO of Fight Voter Fraud. Well, this week we have a special episode, and our guest this week is John Cawthron, and he is a moderator from the state of New Hampshire. And we know you're going to be very interested in hearing what he has to say about what's going on in the state of New Hampshire. So welcome, John. Thank you.
Nice to be here.
Thank you so much for coming on. Well, the first thing we want to know is we want to get your background. And then from there, we want you to tell us what is going on in the state of New Hampshire.
Okay, so I was born in Massachusetts and I moved to New Hampshire in 2004 with my family and loved the move. Live free or die state really means that. So it's a great place to live and bring up your children. And I was never really involved in politics, except I always voted in every election. But I was basically an independent voter who loved this country and just voted for the person that I thought was the best for the job at the time. And then when COVID struck, I was appalled by the illegal actions of our government and the overreach of our government to basically shut down society to something that was no more than a common cold. I did my research and looked into that very deeply, and COVID-19 was a common cold, but they shut down our country for 2 years and did a lot of other measures that I personally did not agree with. The founding fathers knew about plagues, they knew about illnesses, they had yellow fever or illness like that in Philadelphia when they were doing the Declaration of Independence. We also had another one during the Constitutional Convention. And nowhere in the Constitution did the founding fathers say that our rights can be paused or taken away, or that there's an emergency clause that a governor can use or a president can use to take away our rights under the Bill of Rights. And that's what was going on. So when that happened, I decided to get into politics because in the American system, we change things with votes, not with violence. And I ran for state rep in 2022. And in New Hampshire, you really have to be part of a party because if you're not a Democrat or a Republican, it's really kind of difficult to get on the ballot. I looked at both parties and their platforms, and I really felt that I met up with the Republican platform. So I joined the Republican Party and ran for state rep as a Republican in 2022. And I did well, but I lost that election. And then the Republican Party, the local committee, Republican committee, asked that people run for moderator in 2023 because it's an important position and they wanted to have Republicans in that position. And I really didn't know what a moderator was, even though I had voted all those years. This team to me is kind of like a glorified wedding usher. So in 2023, I ran for moderator and I won. So I was elected moderator in 2023. Didn't really know what I was getting into. So I had a lot of learning to do. So I got a hold of some local election integrity folks, and they actually let me know that the moderator within New Hampshire is actually a very powerful constitutional position. Part 2, Article 32 of the New Hampshire Constitution states that elections shall be governed by a moderator who, in the presence of the selectmen, shall receive, sort, and count the votes and announce the results thereof. And that I represent the voters as moderator. I take an oath to uphold the Constitution and the laws and represent the rights of the voters and the candidates to ensure that we have a free, open, and fair election. So I went about learning my job because of the election law manual in New Hampshire, which most of it's not the law. It's basically suggestions from the Secretary of State of best practices on election day, but it's about 1,000 pages thick. So I had to go through a process of learning my job as moderator, which I wanted to do well. And as I went along, I realized that there's some things we're following, some things we're not following. And it's basically a very long day during the election. You're basically at the polling place for about 20 hours to make sure everything's running right and count and sort all the votes and stuff like that. So one thing I learned is in 1978, the state of New Hampshire instituted tabulators to count the ballots in towns that voted to have those. And that they're done as a temporary measure, basically a test measure to see if they're worth using. So New Hampshire started using the tabulators in 1978, but there was a moderator in Danville named Wally Fries who agreed that to use the tabulator, but he said he was going to perform a supplemental hand count of the votes at the end of every election to make sure the tabulator was working properly. So Wally Fries and other moderators in the state of New Hampshire did this from 1978 until 2014. So Wally Fries passed away in 2014, so he's no longer the moderator. And then what happened, I found out, is in 2016, a moderator from Derry, New Hampshire, Mary Tills, decided to do a supplemental hand count, the same thing that Wally Fries had always done. And the Secretary of State, Dave Scanlon, and the Attorney General at the time, whose name escapes me, charged her with committing a crime, several crimes actually, because she wanted to supplement the count of the ballots and make sure the tabulator was working properly.
So something that had been done, and it was under their purview as a moderator to do, it kind of just does this unbelievable parallel to Tina Peters in Colorado doing her job.
Yes.
And to protect the vote. And as most people know, Tina was arrested, sentenced to 9 years in prison. She was just let out on June 1st. And as a quick little sidebar, I did get an opportunity to meet her last week. And she is such a wonderful person. And our government put her through hell, or I should say, the government of Colorado put her through hell for doing her job. So what you're talking about now is something that had been done for a number of years by Wally Fries in making sure that the votes were accurate, which I think is absolutely brilliant at that time, to make sure that the count is what it is supposed to be. So now, after he passed away, but in a different county, the woman you just spoke of, she just did the same thing, and then they charged her. So I'll let you take it from there. It's just, wow.
Yeah, so her name was Mary Till, and she's in the town of Derry, and they charged her with committing a crime for performing an illegal count of the votes because they said that she was auditing the vote and performing a secondary count of the votes, when in fact, in New Hampshire, the election, the first count of the ballots is not complete until I, the moderator, certify the election. And we do a lot of quality control checks during election night to make sure things are run right and the ballots are being counted accurately. But until the election's over and I actually sign off on the paperwork and make a public declaration, there can be no recount because the original count has not been certified. In New Hampshire, the moderators certify the counts for every town or ward and city in the state. It only goes to the Secretary of State after I certify the election. There's a Supreme Court case in New Hampshire from 1873 that I actually quoted to the Secretary of State saying this has already been decided. The Secretary of State plays no role on election day. And the moderator has the ultimate authority as far as the counting of the votes goes on election day. And the Supreme Court upheld that because there was a miscount, I believe, in the governor's race in 1873, and the city clerk decided to adjust that count when the city clerk has no authority in elections either. So what happened to me in 2024 is that I decided to do a supplemental hand count of the votes in my ward. And basically, so everyone knows, in New Hampshire, the Friday before the election, I go to City Hall and all the ballots from my ward are there in boxes. Me and my poll workers take them out of the boxes and we count them all. Because the Secretary of State may say you have 5,000 ballots, but we count them to make sure the exact amount we have. It might end up being 5,010 or 4,995. But in this example, let me just say we had 5,000. We verify we have 5,000. We tape up the boxes. We put them in a secure location, and they stay in that location until election morning when the ward clerk and myself go to City Hall. The clerk is in charge of the blank ballots. We grab all the ballots, we bring them to the polling place, and then we only open up the boxes as we need the ballots. And then at the end of the night, we take all the ballots that were put through the tabulator and we pull them out of the tabulator and we put them on sorting tables and we put them into piles and we count them up. And then all the unused ballots are counted to make sure we end up with the same number of ballots we started with, 5,000. So the total count of the election never changes because we don't want people adding in ballots. The only exception to that is the absentee ballots. In New Hampshire, with absentee voting, we do not have mail-in voting. So just say there was 200 absentee ballots. At the end of the night, I should have 5,200 ballots. We take them out, like I said, on a sorting table, and we count them all. All I wanted to do, which is what Wally Fries did, is in the governor's race, I was going to put Governor Ayotte's ballots in one pile. I was going to put Joyce Craig's ballots in another pile, count up those two piles, make sure they added up to 5,200. And I was going to compare the totals of each pile to the tabulator tape. So to make sure, just say Ayotte had 3,100 by my count and Craig had 2,100, compare that to the tape to make sure the tape matched. Well, my ward clerk, Emily Adesazek, called the Attorney General's office on me and reported me for doing an illegal hand count. So the Attorney General's office got me on the phone, and it was basically yelling at me and berating me for like 45 minutes, telling me they'd have me and my election workers arrested if I did that, because that would be an illegal recount. And I explained to Dick Tracy of the Attorney General's office that no, as moderator, I have the authority to do this and a constitutional duty to do it. But he reiterated that if I did that, myself and my poll workers would be subject to arrest and prosecution. So my poll workers.
That is just stunning. So the Attorney General at the time did not even know the Constitution on what you were allowed to do in counting, which also seems extremely reasonable. It's not like you went and got the workers from, the Department of Transportation to come in and count. They're actually the people working within your office, including yourself as a moderator.
Correct. So the election workers, and they're counting the ballots in. We count the ballots anyway. The thing they object to is me putting in multiple piles and then comparing the totals and comparing those totals to the tape. That's where the rubber meets the road. And it wasn't the Attorney General of New Hampshire, it was their office, and specifically a person named Dick Tracy. Yes, Dick Tracy from the Attorney General's office that threatened me and intimidated me on election night to not perform that supplemental hand count. And it's the comparison of my hand count to the tabulator printout, which they're so afraid of finding what that is, right. which stuns me. Why would they not want to know?
Were you able to do it before they actually, showed up to put you guys in handcuffs? Or did that city clerk, as soon as she got wind that this is what you were going to do, she, immediately ran to, obviously she doesn't know the Constitution.
Correct. And this is not a knock against election workers, but there's a lot to know. It's almost impossible to know it all. And they've been doing the same thing for so long that they assume everything they're doing is the right thing. And I caught people in my ward doing the wrong thing several times, particularly with the announcement of when we'll count absentee ballots and other things as far as posting notices. So no one in my ward, I don't think, had ever done this before. And truth be told, the clerk of my ward is not involved in counting the ballots. She's involved in other things such as, like I said, keeping control of the ballots on election day, registering voters, checking voters in, so forth. But she's not actually, doesn't have a role in the counting of the ballots unless I say, hey, I need your help. Please help us. So basically, I designate who does what on election day as moderator. So she basically called my selectman, Andrew Higgins, who I put in charge of the supplemental hand count because as moderator, I was busy doing other things. And also I was on the ballot in that election. So I decided not to participate in the count. And I gave all my duties to our moderator pro tem, Andrew Higgins, and also another election worker, Young John. And I had put together the counting teams, 4 teams of 2 people each. And so the structure was all there to perform the supplemental hand count, but Emily called the Attorney General pretty much right away. Because Andrew told her what we were doing, she called the office right away. And I was actually on her cell phone getting yelled at by Dick Tracy, the Attorney General's office. And truth be told, if it was just me that would have been arrested, I would have said, do it. But it would have been a lot of other people that would have been subject to that punishment as well. And they weren't on board for that. They all agreed that the supplemental hand count was a great idea. And I make sure my ward team's comprised of an equal number of Democrats, Independents, and Republicans. It's not like the election workers are partisan. And on that day, I tell all my workers, we're Americans today. We're doing an election. We're Americans. We're neutral. We just want to get right. Whoever wins, wins.
Did they even tell you why they thought it was such a horrible idea to make sure, the votes were accurate?
Because they said that I don't have the authority to perform a recount or an audit. Only the Secretary of State can perform a recount or an audit. And they ignored my counterpoint that no, this can't be a recount until I certify the election.
Right.
So in other words, I think they use their authority and power to intimidate election workers to not do the right thing because they know that if we are allowed to do the right thing, we will find the discrepancies that we know that can be there. If you watch the video Hacking Democracy, you can see, I believe it's the Florida Secretary of State with Harry Hursty. They programmed the tabulator and have everyone vote, and Harry Hursty programmed the tabulator to produce the opposite results. So we know that the memory card of the tabulators can be programmed to flip votes, skip votes, do whatever the programmer wants, because of black box voting, you can see it as well. And again, I'm not saying that's happening, but under HABA, we have a no trust system. So if that's a vulnerability, and as a senior systems analyst in a software company, I know what software vulnerabilities are. I just want to address that vulnerability with something we're doing anyways. And the former Secretary of State, Bill Gardner, had said that this process that Wally Fries was doing was an example of New Hampshire common sense, and that this should always be done as a matter of course because it's a quality control check to make sure the tabulator is tabulating properly. Because in New Hampshire in 2020, in Wyndham, they had an incident where the races were close. So the Democrat who lost by a couple of votes asked for a recount. And during the recount, the tabulator had flipped a couple hundred votes to her. She lost anyways and took away hundreds of votes from the Republican candidates. And that had to be looked into because the tabulator was, they said the tabulator was improperly tabulating ballots that had creases in them. But I don't think that was ever proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And there's another person in New Hampshire, Tom Murray, who knows more about that. But the point is, the tabulators can be manipulated and the tabulators can make mistakes. In my first race in 2022, there was a recount because someone who ran with me was a lot closer. Actually, they had won by less than 2%. So during that recount, I gained 39 votes. So we know that mistakes can be made. The ovals might not be filled in properly. So what I don't understand is why the Secretary of State and the Attorney General and the powers that be are so afraid of me doing this. What do they not want us to see?
Right. They don't want us, for whatever reason, they don't want us to show accuracy or common sense. Like I said, you're talking about this. It's not something that, just off the top of your head, hey, maybe I'm just going to start counting these. You have the constitutional authority to do this. And obviously the common sense to say, hey, I know things can be manipulated. And thank you for that. I mean, there's so many people that just don't get it. All the machines right now, they've already been manipulated. The software, we do not want anything electronic. So the system that you're talking about, that the New Hampshire Constitution gives to you, is what every single state should have. And again, what you're pointing out is that it's not a recount because the count has not been certified.
Correct.
The certification of a vote is the signing off of whomever is in charge, which would be you as the moderator, saying that this information is accurate.
Correct.
And why would you want to put your name to something that you have a feeling is not going to be accurate, which is why you felt to be sure you'd have the people count the votes themselves in the ballots. I mean, the way you've explained it, it's just like right now we can't understand why the Democrats in DC will not vote for the Save America Act.
That makes no sense whatsoever. I agree with you.
People with common sense, and even some people without common sense are still saying that, it needs to be passed to make sure the stuff is accurate. And here you have been proactive with this in knowing what occurred. And it wasn't just in 2020 that votes have been manipulated. It's been going on for a number of decades with them testing the system. So we can't trust the system. I mean, so you were not able to do what you felt you needed to do. So where does it stand now for this coming election?
Well, where it stands is that, one, just to clarify a thing, the New Hampshire House of Representatives has written several laws that are unconstitutional, but they get passed anyway. So Part 2, Article 32 of the New Hampshire Constitution has been amended 5 times. Not once have they taken away the power or duty of the moderator away, where in Massachusetts and Maine, they did amend their constitutions to allow the tabulators to be used. And the other thing is the word govern. Govern means something. So the moderator shall govern the election. End of story. It doesn't matter what the Secretary of State or some RSA, in New Hampshire they call laws RSAs, and there's one RSA that makes the city clerk my boss. There's no way the city clerk is my boss. There's a Supreme Court case that says the city clerk plays no role in the election. The moderators do, but this is all being ignored. So what I did is I talked to, since I'm in the Republican Party, and I'm actually now the chairman of the local city committee, and I'm on the state GOP Executive Board. So Bill O'Brien, who's former Speaker of the House, I told him my story, and he's also a lawyer. So Bill facilitated a meeting between myself and the Secretary of State, David Scanlon. So myself and Andrew Higgins, my moderator pro tem, who's going to do the supplemental hand count, met with Mr. Scanlon. I laid out all of my concerns, and he agreed that, the programming could be off and that the tabulators are generally accurate. But he also said that in his mind, me doing a supplemental hand count was a recount of the election, and therefore I didn't have the authority, and that the Supreme Court had already ruled on his side, although he couldn't quote any cases.
Okay.
So
actually, right now, why don't we go to a quick break? And we'll be right back.
We need your help to ensure one vote for one legal voter.
Join Fight Voter Fraud. Request training, get the potential double-registered, double voter data for your town, and donate to support the fight. Visit fightvoterfraud.org, because election integrity starts with you.
Hi, I'm Linda Sinkowitz from Sinkowitz, and I'm here to tell you about an exciting new series that we have just added called Sinkowitz Presents Candidate Spotlight. And this is open to any candidate, any party, anywhere in the country that wants to have a 20-minute interview so you can talk about yourself, your platform, your campaign, and we'll help you get it out there. So give us a call, send us an email, or visit our website. Thank you. Hi, and welcome back to Sinkowitz. Again, I'm Linda Sinkowitz. I'm the founder and CEO of Fight Voter Fraud. Our special guest is John Cawthron, and he is a moderator from Ward 9 in New Hampshire. And it's just unbelievable, the pushback that he's been getting. So we're bringing John back on again. I know before the break, we were talking about the Secretary of State and what they had said about your wanting to do the counting. So I'll let you go from there.
Yeah, so Secretary of State said that there's a statute that prevents me from performing a recount of the election, only that he can do that, and only he had the authority to audit elections. And my position was, well, I'm not doing a recount because I haven't certified the vote. And the previous Secretary of States had agreed with this process and that it was a good common sense New Hampshire thing to do. So he disagreed and said, well, if you do that again, Attorney General's office will, prosecute you for any laws that you do violate, and your election workers will be subject to the same. And I'm paraphrasing there. So at the end of the meeting, I said, so you're telling me, Mr. Scanlon, that my remedies are legislative or judicial? And he said, yes. It was a very cordial meeting, but at that point, I'm like, all right, I need to do something else, because I really don't want to go down the route of having my election workers possibly get arrested for doing the right thing on election night. So I decided to go the legislative route. And I knew there was a state representative here in New Hampshire named Kevin Scully. And I told Kevin Scully my dilemma, and we came up with a very easy solution. And it was called HB 1223, House Bill 1223, which just codified the statutory authority for a moderator to perform a supplemental hand count at the end of any election. It basically said, at his or her sole discretion, the moderator may perform a hand count of any election, and if the hand count results differ from the tabulated results, the hand count shall prevail, and the moderator will immediately report this to the Secretary of State to see what went wrong with the tabulated. Now, the end of that's paraphrasing. And then it went through the process of, we'd report the fact that I found a discrepancy, and that the tabulator would be looked at to see what that discrepancy was. Well, unfortunately, in the Election Law Committee, there were 9 Republicans. They all voted against that. So it got shot down 17-0, and it got tabled. But Kevin Scully was actually to get that pulled off the table to a consent vote, and we only got, I believe, 30 votes out of 400. So I think the Election Law Committee and the state reps really didn't understand what I was trying to accomplish. They were focused on, he wants to hand count elections. I'm like, no, I'm hand counting the ballots anyways. I want to compare one race to make sure the tabulator is working properly. And the Republican leadership in the State House did not support this bill either. They tried to squash it, which is very unfortunate. Dave Scanlon testified against the bill.
Yeah, but it still stands. It's under the Constitution. So you can still do the hand counting again. But this time, I think you probably need to have an attorney on standby with this.
Yeah, so there's the Constitution, which is the law of New Hampshire, right? It's the supremacy clause, just like clause like the U.S. Constitution. But most people in law enforcement, and I don't blame them, no one's a scholar, they're going to say, we're going to follow the law. The law is an RSA with New Hampshire. So the RSAs contradict the Constitution, which in New Hampshire, you use the word repugnant. So there are several election RSAs that are repugnant to the New Hampshire Constitution, and they haven't been challenged in court. So my next relief is going to be judicial, the judicial system. So I'm in the process of getting that done. I want to have an injunction for declaratory relief imposed upon David Scanlon, the Attorney General, to stop interfering with me on election day. I just need some lawyers to help out. The injunction's already been written up. The research has already been done where my constitutional authority comes from. So we're going to see where that goes, because being a man of good conscience, I just cannot let this go. I can't let the elections not be free and fair, or I won't do it. I'll resign.
You have no idea how much I appreciate that. Like I said, with Fight Voter Fraud, we have been battling the system now for 8 years. We know the stuff we're doing, just like you do, that we're following the stuff to make sure, like, one vote for one legal voter. And it
Correct.
is just so, I don't know, discouraging when you come across people who just don't get it. It's not like you're trying to say, hey, can I add in another 100 votes, at my discretion type
Correct.
thing. You're being completely transparent, and to have other Republicans vote against it, you got to ask yourself why. Just like against the Save America Act, why would they be voting against something that is transparent and common sense? But it seems like it's the norm here across the United States to just be plain stupid. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't get it. Getting attorneys to actually help out with election integrity is extremely difficult. Well, whether people realize it or not, the attorneys are intimidated. The attorneys have been threatened with disbarment across the country if you do anything to stand up for election integrity. Time and time again, we've come across that. Fortunately, my attorney, the only thing he has said was that his main goal in life since he met me was to retain his law license.
Wow.
It's just, and he did stick his neck out when we were in the Supreme Court here in Connecticut. And even with that, they went against what the law should be. I got to tell you this little sidebar here. Our Supreme Court case, they then ruled on standing based on Massachusetts law. This was the Connecticut Supreme Court. Unheard of. I mean, it would be different if they used, federal law, which would have also sided with us. But yeah, they used Massachusetts law. So we see this all the time. So with people thinking that, oh, it'll be easy for you to get an attorney, it's not. So you need help. You would obviously love to have an attorney that would do this pro bono for you, because it is expensive. But I'll let you there.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to keep interrupting you, but the resources of people on our side of the fence are few and far between. So we're basically doing this thing ourselves, and we're a mouse battling a gorilla. As in the movie JFK, John Candy had said that. So the mouse can beat the gorilla if he's consistent and doesn't give up. But the other thing is our opposition is very good at slogans. So if you mention election fraud, everyone thinks you're a conspiracy theorist, because the opponents of it think it out like we're all crazy. Like everything's fine, don't look under the hood. And when you're looking under the hood like I am, everything is not fine. So we get labeled as being crazy, and no one, especially politicians, do not want to be associated with people who the mainstream will say are crazy or conspiracy theorists, just like the whole COVID situation. So the politicians probably don't understand as well, because all they heard was hand count, and they're like, hand counts take too long. So a supplemental hand count is part of the ballot reconciliation process that happens after every election. And this would not take any more time, would not cost any more money. But the other thing I'd like to bring to the light is the founding fathers of New Hampshire, just like the founding fathers of our country, set up an election system here in New Hampshire that's basically decentralized, locally controlled, and has checks and balances. So our Part 2, Article 32 states, the moderator, in the presence of the selectmen, there are 3 selectmen who are elected. They watch the moderator to make sure I'm not doing anything underhanded. They have to sign off on the election too. So if the moderator is doing something he shouldn't be, the selectmen are there to watch me and report me. So the system of check and balances is there already, and it's local control of my ward or the city I live in, so the town I live in New Hampshire. The moderator governs the election, is overseen by the 3 selectmen. He reports the results to the city clerk. So there's a system in place the founding fathers put there of local control and oversight. As I said before, the Secretary of State in most states is now trying to get involved in the election day processes. They have no business doing so. The moderators do so. The other local election officials do so. He has an oversight of the election in general, but not on election day, and they should stay out of it. I'm being threatened with charging a crime before I committed a crime. It's not even a crime because it's unconstitutional, but they're so afraid of me comparing the hand count to the tape printout. That makes me realize I must be over the target. There is something there, or they say, go ahead and do it. And we did, as a matter of course, anyways, for years.
I was going to say, so you're definitely over the target. And here's a thought. What if you decide not to certify the election based on the tabulator results?
I have thought of doing that, and my feeling is they'd come up with some way of charging me with not doing my duty, relieve me of my duty, and then appoint somebody that they'd sign off, even though that person had no idea if it was done. I think that's how they get around that, because the powers that be wouldn't let this go.
Right. It happened in Arizona. I forgot which county. They have 15 counties, and in 2020, there was one of the election officials or who was ever in charge out there that refused to certify the election because they had seen so much fraud and they knew things were going on. They were also threatened with jail time, that if they did not certify the election, which is kind of crazy. I think there's stuff that needs to be done ahead of time to make sure elections are not certified unless there's some legal things actually in place to make sure they're accurate. I'm actually working with someone right now. We're trying to come up with something that will help in that capacity as well. I'll make sure we add on New Hampshire and see what we can do with our investigating into how to do this. People think you make things up and you're not.
Oh. No, I've lived it. I've lived it.
We're not crazy. And it's not like we're telling people we want to see how you voted. No, we just want to make sure that whomever people voted for is the person that is put into that position. That's it. And the pushback is just crazy.
And under HAVA, we have a no trust election system, which means you don't trust anything, you verify everything. That's why when the Secretary of State says, hey, I sent you 5,000 ballots, I don't trust him that he did it. I count the ballots. Then we seal the ballots. Then we bring the ballots to the polling place on the election day. Then a voter comes in and says, hey, I can vote. We say, well, you can vote. Show us your ID. Repeat your name and address. Okay, we verified that you are able to vote. You're a citizen in my ward. You can go vote. So we should verify the tabulators are working properly as well. Now, the city clerk will say that he ran a test of the tabulators. Well, as a senior systems analyst, I can tell you there's test mode and there's production mode. So whatever you run in test mode has no bearing on what happens in production. And we also know the tabulators can be programmed to do one thing for the first 50 votes, another thing for the next 500. They can weight the votes. There's all kinds of ways the votes can be manipulated. So in a no trust system, which is required under HAVA, I think they're actually violating federal law, one for an intimidating an election official because they prevented me from performing my duties. They actually in 2024 intimidated the voters because any voter who wanted his ballot hand counted, the Secretary of State and the Attorney General instructed all the moderators, if the voter wants the vote hand counted, you are to take their information and report them to the authorities. That's what they told us to do. I refuse.
Actually, I think you might even have a civil rights case. Honestly, I mean, just with what you've explained to us and what New Hampshire is doing, I believe you actually have a federal case right now. I'm not an attorney, but I'm just saying this might be an avenue that you want to check into, because I completely agree with you. I mean, the violation of HAVA, the Help America Vote Act. I mean, every state is doing that, by the way.
Oh, I agree. I agree.
You know, I mean, we do analysis on different states to even show how they're violating this ahead of time. But knowing that, some people are probably saying, oh my God, we're going to be counting ballots like in California. No. California is totally different. California is set up to 100% cheat every possible way you can, because counting the ballots is as simple as counting a dot. Can you count a dot?
I can.
That's all it is counting the dots. And you can count them very quickly, have them verified. Like you said, you have 4 sets of 2 people doing this. You can also have it done, you know, with videotaping from start to finish. From that Friday, when you count those 5,000 ballots, the blank ballots that have come in, showing that you're counting them. This might be something else that you want to make sure, no matter what happens, that you do this November, is to videotape every single process. And also when you're videotaping, I would videotape those 3 selectmen that are there that also have to verify. You make sure you have them on camera, understanding their job. Their job is to watch you to make sure you're doing things accurately. So again, with that, I mean, I know you're considering your election workers or volunteers and helping you. You might also want to see if some of the volunteers are willing to go through the whole 9 yards with you. Go, listen, I might get arrested for doing this, and so would you, for following the Constitution. Are you on board with this? So we can take your feeling guilty about doing it to somebody else. No, they are not allowing you to do your job.
Correct.
And you are legally allowed to do your job.
I'm obligated to do my job.
Yes. I would, yeah. I mean, these are just my suggestions. Again, I'm not an attorney. These are my own personal thoughts. And actually, I used to have a radio show with stuff that they would make me say the disclaimer. Yeah, these are entirely my opinion and not that of my organization, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I just want to make sure we have that disclaimer out there. It's my personal opinion of what I've said in the last minute and a half. But now, I mean, just getting your thoughts.
So one, I have filed a complaint with the Department of Justice, and I actually got a phone call back. So they're looking into a litany of issues that I've wrote them about going back to 2023, I believe, when I ran the first in the nation primary election. So there's a whole synopsis of issues that have arisen where my authority's been taken away, or the voters' rights have been taken away, or they instructed me to violate the voters' rights and I refused. So that complaint was filed 2 months ago, and they actually did call me back to verify a few details of the complaint. So that's in process. But as far as the election workers go, basically, I talked to my election workers and I ran this by them to see if they thought it was a good idea, and they all did think it was a good idea. They had no idea that the Secretary of State thought it was illegal, because on election day, and my ward is usually very well staffed. I have about 26 different workers, and that doesn't include the Board of Registrars who register same-day voters, which we have a very good process in New Hampshire for that. And we have shifts. So basically there's three shifts of election workers, all trying to do the right thing and all trying to follow the various rules and laws that we have to follow. But what these rules and laws do is they put me in a catch-22 position. If I follow my oath and enforce the Constitution, the Attorney General wants to have me arrested. If I don't follow my oath and I violate the laws, then the voters sue, and they sue me, not the Secretary of State. So I'm responsible in both instances, that if I don't follow the laws, I can be sued by a citizen. If I follow my conscience and the Constitution, I get arrested by the government. And I said to the Election Law Committee, who can work under those conditions? You're not only working 20 hours that day, sometimes 22, but you're trying to do the right thing, and if you do, you're threatened with arrest. If you don't, you can be sued by a voter. So we need to correct this in New Hampshire. They just need to restore the constitutional authority back to the moderator, get the powers that be in Concord, New Hampshire out of our elections on election day. It is the moderator, the selectman, the ward clerk. Let us do our job. Let us count the votes. Let us make sure the machine's working properly, stay out of our way. Because we are doing a very good job, but we just want to verify one thing, that the tabulator is not flipping votes or doing something it shouldn't be, and that the vote counts at the end of our election are accurate and the best candidate won. That's what we want.
It's plain and simple. So if someone wants to reach out to you, do you have a way for them to get in contact with you if they want to offer suggestions or see how they can help?
Yeah, I would say send me an email. I'm happy to share my email address. I'm not a huge social media person, believe it or not. They can also reach out to NashuaGOP.com. I'm the chairman of that committee, so you can contact me through that committee's website as well. But like I said, as a moderator, I'm an American. I'm not a Republican. I just want to have a free and fair election. So.
Thank you so much, John, for coming on and telling us your story about what is going on in New Hampshire. And we definitely want to keep in touch with you, and hopefully we can get this resolved.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you
so
very much,
much.
Linda.